The 20th century witnessed two devastating world wars, leaving behind a profound aversion to armed conflict. The horrors of these wars led to a global desire for peace, embodied in the formation of the United Nations and international laws designed to prevent future atrocities. Yet, as the century drew to a close, a new type of conflict emerged, one seemingly justified not by territorial ambition or ideological struggle, but by a moral, imperative humanitarian intervention. This new kind of war, waged in the name of human rights and championed by powerful nations, promised to protect vulnerable populations from oppression and violence. But was this new military humanism truly a force for good, or did it mask more cynical motives? The NATO bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999, ostensibly to protect Kosovar Albanians from ethnic cleansing by Serbian forces, became a crucial testing ground for this emerging paradigm. This intervention, undertaken without UN Security Council authorization, raised profound questions about the legitimacy, legality, and ultimate effectiveness of military action in the name of humanitarianism. Was this a genuine attempt to alleviate suffering, or a dangerous precedent for powerful states to impose their will under the guise of moral righteousness? The conflict in Kosovo, a province within Serbia, was marked by escalating violence between the Serbian government and the Kosovo Liberation Army, an ethnic Albanian separatist group. The KLA sought independence for Kosovo, while the Serbian government aimed to maintain territorial integrity. Amidst this struggle, accusations of human rights abuses by both sides abounded, with reports of killings, expulsions, and widespread displacement of civilians. The international community, deeply concerned by the escalating crisis, grappled with how to respond to the violence and prevent further suffering. The NATO intervention, launched in March 1999, was presented as a necessary measure to halt the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Kosovo. NATO argued that the bombing campaign, targeting Serbian military infrastructure and strategic sites, was essential to deter further Serbian aggression and protect the Kosovar Albanian population. However, the intervention itself proved highly controversial, with critics questioning its legality, its military tactics, and its ultimate impact on the people it sought to protect. The 78-day bombing campaign resulted in significant civilian casualties and widespread destruction of infrastructure, raising serious questions about the proportionality and justification of the intervention. In his incisive critique, The New Military Humanism, Lessons from Kosovo, renowned political activist and scholar Noam Chomsky challenges the dominant narrative surrounding the NATO intervention. Chomsky argues that the Kosovo War, far from being a humanitarian endeavor, was driven by a complex interplay of geopolitical interests, power politics, and a desire to assert Western dominance. He contends that the humanitarian justifications offered for the intervention were largely a smokescreen, obscuring the West's real motivations. Chomsky dissects the historical context of the Kosovo conflict, highlighting the West's role in the breakup of Yugoslavia and its support for various factions within the region. He argues that the NATO intervention, rather than being a spontaneous response to a humanitarian crisis, was part of a broader strategy to expand Western influence in the Balkans and counter any potential Russian resurgence in the region. Chomsky's analysis provides a starkly different perspective on the Kosovo War, urging readers to question the motives of powerful states and the true costs of military intervention. He challenges us to consider whether humanitarian intervention is ever truly justifiable and whether it ultimately serves the interests of the interveners or the intervened. Chomsky challenges the notion of a new military humanism, arguing that military force for humanitarian ends is not new. He cites historical examples of interventions under the pretext of protecting human rights. Chomsky argues these often serve strategic or economic interests. The NATO intervention in Kosovo fits this pattern. Chomsky suggests it was more about NATO's relevance and US hegemony. He points to selective outrage and double standards in humanitarian interventions. Section 2, Unmasking Hidden Agendas, Strategic Interests over Human Rights. Chomsky dissects the strategic motivations behind NATO's intervention in Kosovo. The US aimed to consolidate influence in the Balkans post-Soviet Union. Kosovo was key in this geopolitical chess game. The intervention demonstrated NATO's relevance and aimed to curb Russian influence. Chomsky highlights the economic dimensions, securing resources and markets. The intervention integrated the Balkans into Western economic and security structures. Chomsky argues it set a dangerous precedent for future interventions. Section 3, The Limits of Force, Exacerbating the Very Suffering it Aims to Alleviate. Chomsky argues that NATO's bombing campaign in Kosovo intensified ethnic cleansing rather than preventing it. Serbian atrocities against Kosovar Albanians escalated after the bombing began. The intervention created chaos, instability, and a security vacuum filled by armed groups. Chomsky highlights the limitations of military force for humanitarian objectives. Section 4, Selective Outrage, Double Standards in International Intervention. Chomsky highlights the West's intervention in Kosovo versus its inaction during the Rwandan genocide. Nearly 1 million were slaughtered in Rwanda, yet the international community did little. The US and its allies focused on the Balkans, ignored Rwanda. Chomsky argues the US undermined UN peacekeeping efforts in Rwanda. This indifference contrasts with the West's stance in Kosovo. Chomsky also cites the East Timor crisis as another example. Despite atrocities, the US supported Indonesia during East Timor's struggle. These cases reveal the double standards in humanitarian intervention. Decisions to intervene are often driven by political and economic interests. Section 5, Manufacturing Consent, the Role of Media Propaganda. Chomsky argues that the success of the new military humanism depends heavily on the ability of powerful states to shape public opinion and manufacture consent for their interventions. He contends that the media, often complicit in this process, plays a crucial role in legitimizing military action by presenting a sanitized and one-sided narrative of events. In the case of Kosovo, Chomsky argues, the media played a key role in demonizing the Serbs, portraying them as inherently barbaric and aggressive, while downplaying or ignoring the complexities of the conflict and the role of the West in its escalation. This biased coverage, Chomsky contends, helped to create a climate of fear and outrage that made it easier for Western governments to justify military intervention to their publics. Chomsky argues that the media, rather than acting as a critical watchdog, often serves as a mouthpiece for government propaganda, particularly in times of war or international crisis. He points to the embedded journalism prevalent during the Kosovo intervention, where reporters were granted access to military operations but subject to strict censorship, as an example of how the media can be co-opted by the military to shape public perception. Chomsky's analysis of the media's role in the Kosovo War highlights the importance of critical media literacy and the need to question dominant narratives, particularly those that seek to justify the use of military force. He encourages readers to seek out alternative sources of information and to be wary of propaganda, which often masquerades as objective reporting. Section 1. The erosion of international law and order. Chomsky argues that the NATO intervention in Kosovo without UN Security Council authorization eroded international law and order. By bypassing established mechanisms, the US and its allies set a dangerous precedent for future interventions. The UN Charter prohibits the use of force except in self-defense or with Security Council authorization. This principle ensures force is a last resort after all peaceful means are exhausted. Chomsky warns that eroding international law increases the risk of powerful states using force for self-interest. He argues for a rules-based international order to maintain global peace and stability. Section 2. Fueling the fires of nationalism and ethnic conflict. Chomsky argues that NATO's intervention in Kosovo deepened ethnic tensions, making peace more elusive. The intervention reinforced narratives of victimhood and grievance on both sides, complicating reconciliation. Chomsky highlights the need for nuanced approaches in ethnic conflicts, prioritizing dialogue over military solutions. Section 3. The perpetuation of global power imbalances. Chomsky contends that NATO's intervention in Kosovo reinforced Western dominance rather than promoting justice. He criticizes the selective nature of Western interventions, driven by strategic interests. Chomsky calls for a shift from militarism to diplomacy and cooperation for a just peace. Section 4. The real cost of war. Militarism's toll on society. Chomsky argues that war's true cost extends beyond the battlefield, impacting societies profoundly. He highlights the diversion of resources from social programs and the erosion of democratic values. Chomsky urges a focus on peaceful solutions that prioritize diplomacy and cooperation. Section 5. The seeds of future conflicts, unintended consequences and blowback. Chomsky warns that military interventions often have unintended consequences, fueling future conflicts. He points to the rise of extremism post-interventions as evidence of this. Chomsky advocates for addressing root causes of conflict through diplomacy and cooperation. When silence speaks volumes, East Timor and the West's selective indignation. Chomsky contrasts the West's intervention in Kosovo with its inaction in East Timor. He argues that geopolitical interests dictate international responses, not humanitarian concerns. Chomsky challenges us to critically evaluate the motivations behind interventions. The illusion of neutrality manufacturing consent through media control. Chomsky argues that media often serves as a mouthpiece for power, shaping public perception. He highlights the biased portrayal of conflicts to garner support for interventions. Chomsky urges critical consumption of media and seeking independent news sources. The Emperor's New Clothes unmasking the fallacy of just war in Kosovo. Chomsky challenges the notion of just war, arguing it is often manipulated for political agendas. He critiques the selective application of just war principles. Chomsky calls for a critical evaluation of military actions veiled in humanitarian rhetoric. Section 4. Echoes of History, Vietnam and the Perils of Ignoring Historical Precedents. Chomsky draws parallels between Kosovo and Vietnam, highlighting repeated mistakes. He argues that hubris and flawed assumptions lead to protracted conflicts. Chomsky urges learning from history to avoid perpetuating cycles of violence. Section 5. Beyond the rubble, the unseen costs of humanitarian interventions. Chomsky argues that humanitarian interventions have long-term social, political, and economic costs. He highlights the erosion of trust and deepening social divisions. Chomsky calls for prioritizing peaceful solutions that address root causes of conflict. Section 1. The Fallacy of Benevolent Hegemony. Chomsky dismantles the notion of benevolent hegemony, exposing self-serving interventions. He argues that humanitarian justifications often mask strategic interests. Chomsky calls for genuine humanitarianism based on justice and equality, not military force. Section 2. Towards a more just and peaceful world order. Chomsky's critique of the Kosovo intervention is not merely an indictment of a single historical event, but a call for a fundamental rethinking of international relations and the pursuit of peace. He argues that a more just and peaceful world order cannot be built on the foundations of military might, selective intervention, and the pursuit of hegemonic power. Instead, Chomsky advocates for a paradigm shift, moving away from the reliance on military solutions towards a system grounded in diplomacy, international cooperation, and a respect for international law. He argues that lasting peace can only be achieved by addressing the root causes of conflict, poverty, inequality, political oppression, rather than resorting to military interventions that often exacerbate these underlying issues. Chomsky's vision calls for a radical departure from the status quo, challenging the current power dynamics that privilege the few at the expense of the many. He envisions a world where dialogue replaces military action, where cooperation trumps competition, and where the pursuit of justice and equality forms the cornerstone of international relations. Section 3. The power of informed dissent. Chomsky's work underscores the vital role of informed dissent in challenging the dominant narratives, particularly in matters of war and peace. He argues that questioning the official line, even when presented as unquestionable truth, is not only a right but a responsibility, especially when those in power seek to justify military action. The Kosovo intervention, Chomsky argues, highlights the dangers of blindly accepting the narratives presented by governments and a compliant media. He encourages us to engage in critical thinking, to seek out alternative perspectives, and to be wary of propaganda that often masquerades as objective reporting, particularly in times of conflict. Chomsky reminds us that dissent, even when inconvenient or unpopular, is the lifeblood of a healthy democracy and a necessary antidote to the dangers of unchecked power. He urges us to be critical consumers of information, to challenge the status quo, and to raise our voices against injustice, even when it seems that the world is not listening. Section 4. The imperative of diplomatic solutions. Chomsky's analysis of the Kosovo intervention underscores the urgent need to prioritize diplomatic solutions and exhaust all peaceful means before resorting to military force. He argues that the use of force should always be a last resort, undertaken only after all other options have been exhausted and with a clear understanding of the potential consequences. Chomsky argues that the pursuit of diplomatic solutions requires patience, a willingness to understand different perspectives, and a genuine commitment to finding common ground. He acknowledges that diplomacy can be a complex and challenging process, often requiring compromises and concessions from all parties involved. However, Chomsky firmly believes that the potential rewards of diplomacy, preventing bloodshed, fostering reconciliation, and building a more just and peaceful world, far outweigh the challenges. He urges us to support diplomatic efforts, to hold our leaders accountable for pursuing peaceful solutions, and to reject the notion that military force is the only viable option in a complex and interconnected world. Section 5. The enduring relevance of Chomsky's critique. 2 decades after the Kosovo intervention, Chomsky's analysis remains strikingly relevant, offering crucial insights into the ongoing debates surrounding humanitarian intervention, the use of military force, and the pursuit of a more just and peaceful world order. His work continues to challenge conventional wisdom, prompting us to critically examine the narratives presented by those in power and to question the true costs of military solutions. Chomsky's critique of the Kosovo intervention serves as a stark reminder that history is replete with cautionary tales, urging us to learn from past mistakes and to approach the use of military force with utmost caution. His work compels us to consider the long-term consequences of our actions, to recognize the inherent limitations of military solutions, and to prioritize peaceful alternatives that address the root causes of conflict. As we navigate an increasingly complex and interconnected world grappling with new challenges and persistent threats to peace, Chomsky's unwavering commitment to critical thought, his meticulous examination of power dynamics, and his unwavering belief in the power of informed dissent remain as essential as ever. His work serves as a beacon, guiding us towards a future where diplomacy triumphs over violence, where justice prevails over power, and where the pursuit of peace remains our collective responsibility.